Hello and welcome to From the Marginlands, a fortnightly podcast where we explore the intrinsic connections between us and our environment.
So, to start off this edition of the podcast, to look at the headlines that caught our attention in the week gone by.
And also to just kind of tease how we read the news. Um, for me, there are three questions that kind of guide my consumption of the news, if you will. The three questions are: what is the source of the story? Um, and the second one is why now? Why is the story surfacing now? There's usually some trigger or some cue as to why this story might be coming out now. So that kind of stays in my mind. And the last one, which I feel is the most important, is who benefits from this story. So those are the three questions that I use to parse any news item. What do you do, Prem? How do you read the news?
The last item that you mentioned, cui bono, who benefits, is one of the first lessons that journalists are taught when we are fed, say, a press release or somebody calls us with a tip or whatever. It's just to ask, why is this coming to me? Why is this person calling me or otherwise communicating with me, and who benefits out of this? It's one of the fundamental ways of parsing what lies behind a news story. I think the only addition is this is an exercise that we used to do in newsrooms where that I've been part of, particularly for young journalists, trainee journalists, but it's applicable to everybody. One of the issues with news stories is it's increasingly difficult to separate fact from speculation, from opinion, from extrapolation, and all of that. So what we used to do is give them a black pen, a Sharpie, or one of those highlighters, and ask them to redact everything that is not provable fact, and then you see what you're left with. So all the opinion gets knocked out, all the speculation gets knocked out, and then you see what the facts are, and then you can make up your mind about the questions that you asked. It becomes increasingly clearer what the answers are.
How would you do that with, say, a PR piece? I mean, you don't know that it's a PR piece, but it's clearly a PR piece because when you look for sources, everybody seems to be drawing from the same one. So it's clear that if they all got that same PR piece, but then that could be masquerading as fact, right?
It could be, but one of the giveaways is almost invariably people are quoted in these pieces, and when I
Mm,
see sources
mm,
without attribution, I start suspecting a plant, because there are very few instances where the source will not be named. Obviously, personal safety is one of them, and you can make that out from the tenor of the news. But an anodyne news story, which is unsourced, always gets my antenna going up. And that's probably one of the primary ways of looking at these things.
mm. Okay. Let's look at what caught our attention this week.
Mhm.
And with the caveat that we will reserve the right to go deeper into any one of these actually in the coming episodes, because they might have repercussions, redactions, responses from other parties, and we might want to uh, surface those or dig
Yeah.
deeper. Some of them are still developing stories, so we might want to go to that as well,
Mhm.
right? Follow it up. And by the time the next episode comes along, there might be developments. So we will be doing updates as well, right? So
Yeah, and
let's
we
do
should
that. But
also bring informed voices to speak to some of these news stories.
yes,
So we'll do that
which we will be
as we
doing.
go.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, yes, yes. Excellent. So without further ado, the first episode, the first news item that kind of caught our eye was was WWF helping facilitate trade in polar bear fur, which was a Guardian investigation which revealed this. And this article from which was in the Guardian, it's basically saying that the World Wildlife Fund has policies that support trade of polar bear fur, touting, I think they say, sustainable use, while using their images to fundraise for protection of the polar bear. So they've opposed full protection for polar bears at international conventions like CITES, arguing that trade isn't a significant threat despite declining populations. And the charity also maintains that this stance while claiming to prioritize conservation and indigenous rights. So that's particularly egregious at a time when the loss of the Arctic sea ice is impacting the health of polar bears, and it starts to show that fewer cubs are surviving and more polar bears are dying at a younger age. So there's clearly almost like a conflict of opinion and interest right there, and it seems like it's two-faced. But I think we need also to dig deeper, and we will be following this over the weeks.
Yes.
Right. Mm-hmm.
The next story that caught our attention is one that says that the ammonia levels are rising in the Yamuna yet again, and that it may hit the water supply. The article reports that ammonia levels in the Yamuna have spiked to about 8 parts per million, which is well above the 1 part per million limit that Delhi water treatment plants can manage. What this does is it threatens to reduce the water production that services Delhi. And as with so much else in this country, the issue has been politicized. The Aam Aadmi Party has been accusing the BJP ruled Haryana of deliberate contamination. Uh, it's also a recurring seasonal problem, largely caused by untreated industrial chemicals and sewage. The article points out that though a treatment plant was actually planned by the previous AAP government, it was never implemented. On the good side, I suppose you would call it, the BJP now governs both Delhi and Haryana, so there is some expectation that this question of ongoing water quality will be issued. I remember reading a story in the Hindu recently, which said that there's been a cleanup operation that had begun way back in 2023 and was expected to take 3 years. So that's 2026 is the deadline that they're talking about. So again, like you said, for the previous story, this is one of the things that we'll need to dig a little deeper into and keep an eye on.
Yeah, and also there's a related one which I think got tremendous. It was just it made quite a noise, I think, last week, where the whole Mahakumbh and the quality of the Ganga at the Mahakumbh Snan site, and the fact that there was fecal coliform, presence, and it was highly polluted. There were also claims that the Ganga is self-cleaning and that none of this will matter, and then there were counterclaims, of course, by people who spoke the science and basically brought out the fact that yes, the Ganga does have some self-cleaning properties, but then with this kind of overload, much of that is degraded. And so we will in future episodes be having the guest who wrote that article, which is based in science, to talk us through how to look at pollution in the Ganga.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. Then there was another related, interesting, again, water-related article that caught our eye. Food-borne bugs and their links with climate change come into focus. This was in Mongabe, and it was talking about the recent outbreaks of the Guillain-Barré syndrome in India. Specifically, I think around Pune, where there were 211 cases in Maharashtra, 17 in Andhra Pradesh, linked to the Campylobacter jejuni bacteria. And the article said that the study suggests that climate change may be increasing foodborne pathogen transmission, which because of rising temperatures and increasing risk by 5%. So bacteria do survive well in water and with seasonal spikes occurring in winter. And so this Scandinavian research predicts cases could double by 2080s due to climate impacts. Now, again, the same guest who we will be having to talk us through the Ganga water thing is a has written a wonderful book on viruses called The Invisible Empire, and this guy is, of course, Pranay Lal, the excellent Pranay Lal. So we will be having him, and he will also be talking us through some of this connection of viruses and how viruses behave, and the interplay of virus, bacteria, bacteriophages, and so on. So very interesting stuff. I heard him at the Salon Lit Fest recently, and the
Hmm.
man is so full of stories and information. Look forward to a really nice episode with him in the future.
Yeah, and that's one of the commonalities with all the stories that we found just now, that these stories provide some sort of basic information, but each of them is a prompt for both of us to dig deeper, to talk to people, to find out what's happening behind the headlines. And on the same note, probably the last headline that we want to look at in this particular episode, fishing cat study exposes heavy metal presence in the Sunderbans. Uh, this story, it's a study on fishing cats in the Sunderbans, and what the study found was concerning levels of heavy metals, lead and chromium particularly, in their scat samples, as well as in environmental samples and also throughout the food chain. So the research was led by people from Calcutta University and the Indian Statistical Institute, and their investigation points to chemical larvicides and industrial effluents as the likely sources of contamination. There's an analysis for microplastics, which is ongoing, with the final results expected sometime in April, I think they said. So all of this actually increases concern around the subject because there was an earlier study that found microplastics in edible fish species in the region, which are primary prey for the approximately 385 fishing cats that inhabit the Sundarbans. Arti, you've spent a considerable amount of time in the Sundarbans, uh, just exploring, following up various threads, etc. Do you have any insight to add to this?
Um, Well, I was in touch with the person who did this study, and let's hope that we can have a chat with him as well in the future, and follow up, as to, because I know one of the takeaways from the study was that there should be more research on this. But
Mhm.
just pure conjecture from my side, the way I was thinking about it, especially when I heard industrial effluents and larvicides,
Mhm.
something that kills larvae, chemical larvicides, which cues some kind of insecticide, pesticide kind of thing. And it kind of made me wonder about all those ships capsizing in the Hooghly, which
Yeah.
happens regularly. And I remember counting, I think in the first 4 months of, I think it was 3 years ago, the first 4 months had something like eight capsizings of ships, which had everything from fly ash to pesticides to everything. And so all of this goes into our river systems. Industrial effluents, we all know, go into our river systems. And this kind of goes back to what we were talking about, earlier, which, before we hit record, which was basically that environment is not something that is out there. Environment is what is all around us, and everything we do every day affects the environment in some way or the other. And so, yeah, look at where the Sundarbans is, and we think it's so remote, but really it isn't. What's happening upstream is coming home to roost in the Sundarbans, and that's because everything is connected. And it's really sad to see that something that so many people, especially tourists uh, who who enjoy such things, who have never been there before, will come back and say, "Oh, it's pristine," or "It's so beautiful," and it's, untouched. I've heard "untouched" a lot,
Oh, yeah.
and then when you see news items like this, you realize that it's far from being pristine or untouched. It's very much touched. It is actually getting destroyed pretty fast at various levels, and I'm sure we'll be talking about the Sundarbans at some point down the road because, well, tomorrow I'm leaving for the Sunderbans as well. So,
Yeah.
and so by the time this episode drops, I'll be back from there, and let's see, what goes on as we pull along.
Yeah, when you said you were leaving for the Sundarbans tomorrow, it suddenly cued a memory from our Peoply days. I remember you going to the Sundarbans. You were exploring a completely different story, and I remember this call you made to me saying you were on a boat and there was dense mist. You could barely see, if you held your hand in front of your face, you couldn't see it. And then suddenly this massive ship looming in front of your boat and your boat having to take evasive action. I think you nearly lost your camera on that when the boat swerved, and you had to make a grab for it. And I remember you saying that ships of this size going down the Sundarbans in this kind of heavy mist is a prescription for disaster. And I think 2 or 3 months later, the oil spill happened and he went back to cover it. So, yeah, it's it's really, I mean, a lot of what we come across is basically chronicles of disasters foretold, right? I mean, you see it coming and you wonder why others can't see it coming, why they can't take preventive action.
Yep. Yeah, and I think this is another, one of the other things that, again, was that same trip where I saw the shrimp farms, and
Oh, yeah.
those were the reason why these massive oil tankers were even going through the Sundarbans, and this is on the Bangladeshi side, and why it was a recipe for disaster is again, there are so many connections back to urban life, which we don't not necessarily make when we think of environment or when we think of nature and national parks and things like that. It's all something very far away and something to be enjoyed by us when we have free time. But really, it's all very much very close. Everything is really closely knitted, and we need to be quite aware and kind of reclaim those connections, and kind of be aware of how our actions affect these things, because um, whether we like it or not, a lot of these ecosystems are vital to our survival.
Hmm.
There is
Yeah.
no question about it. No question about it at all. Losing one thing, we will come to know much later how it's affecting us, and it is much easier to protect and not have to, kind of re bring it back to life. It doesn't happen. So, yeah. So things are. I mean, I guess I got a little pontification there, but it's just, we let's keep talking about this, and would love to hear from people,
Hmm.
and what they have to say, and maybe articles that they've come across that they think are important. Please share it with us. We'd love to dissect it. We will be doing a dissection of articles going forward, where we will apply those. What's the source, why now, and who does it benefit? We will be applying those lenses to articles as well as we go on, so that we kind of get into the habit of reading with critical thought engaged.
Yeah. And Arti always comes back from the Sundarbans with stories. So since there is a trip upcoming, uh, the outcomes of that will probably feature in one of the
Oh no.
upcoming episodes. But I think, yeah, with that, we'll end the headline segment for this episode, and we'll pick it up again in the next one. Our first guest on this podcast should need no introduction. In any case, I don't think either Arti or I have the chops to introduce a two-time Pulitzer winner who has, for over a decade, been engaged in one of the most mind-boggling journalism projects that you can imagine. Paul Salopek's 38,000-kilometer walk under the label Out of Eden Walk that sees him retrace the pathways of the first humans who migrated out of Africa sometime in the Stone Age is an experiment in slow journalism, a phrase that is unique to what he does. At one point during a conversation, Paul told us that he was basically rediscovering the world with his feet.
On his walk, Paul has been covering the major stories of our time, from climate change to technological innovation, from mass migration to cultural survival, to by giving voice to people who live these stories every day. The archive of his walk, which is still ongoing, is a global record of human life at the start of a new millennium, as told by villagers, nomads, traders, farmers, soldiers, artists, by people who rarely ever make the news, and sometimes by the people who walk alongside Paul. All of that is his bio. More to the point, Paul is one of the most empathetic human beings we know.
Having said that he needs no introduction, we did provide a fairly long introduction, but that is because besides being hosts to Paul on the show, we are also fanboy, fangirl. So here's Paul Salopek.
Welcome, Paul.
Paul, at the risk of repeating myself, for both of us, such a pleasure, such an honor to have you on the show. Thank you so much for making the time. We'd like to start you off by asking about Out of Eden Walk, and I know that you've done this so many times that you're probably getting fed up of hearing this question. But what put this thought into your head about what you once called reading the world with your feet?
Mhm.
And how did that go?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's. I'll try to keep the answer short because the truth is really long. I mean, it was probably a process of years, if not decades, right? So it's an artifact of my biography of kind of moving across borders as a kid and growing up in a kind of a rural environment in Latin America, still kind of working in a handmade world, using draft animals to do agriculture and hand tools. It's a quote unquote kind of slow lifestyle, slow economy, if you will. And so that probably got internalized when I was a kid. And then I got into uh, science. I became a student of biology, which involved a lot of sitting out, in the environment and observing for long periods of time, observing things like ferns, so that requires, botany was my major. So it requires a certain acceptance that, long kind of observation is part of what you do. And then into journalism, I did start as a breaking news reporter, as you both know, at a small newspaper in America, during the police beat, and writing sometimes multiple stories every day for a small newspaper. But by the time I was kind of at the end of my my official foreign corresponding gig with a big American newspaper hosted on, I was doing really long form stuff. So there's been this kind of, it's both an evolution, but also a reiteration of kind of nothing new in my life. Still kind of doing the same thing, but on different scales, from a
Paul,
Mexican village.
we just lost you there for a second. Can you just repeat where were you when you were doing the long form stuff as a foreign correspondent?
I was based in Africa for the Chicago Tribune. So, and I was based there a really long time by kind of industry standards. I think almost 9 years, which is like a record for that newspaper that anybody would stay in
And you
that
were
post.
in Nairobi, or where were you?
Johannesburg. Yeah.
Johannesburg, okay.
And it was one of these ridiculous beats of kind of covering an entire continent, which is, absurd. A billion people, more than 40 countries. Some of these countries had 200 languages. Um, but what it did is it drew on the skills that would then inform this project, the Out of Eden Walk project, which is enterprise, so-called enterprise reporting, right? There's no way that I could compete with other international correspondents who had bureaus with 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 reporters. So I had very wise editors who recognized this and said, let's just play to our strength. Why don't you go out and talk to people where you are and kind of sift through their concerns and pick what are kind of the 10 biggest issues that the people living around you, in this case, in South Africa or Angola, Congo, what are their concerns? And so there was this kind of cool system that by the end of the year, every January, at the beginning of the year rather, as the calendar year was starting, I'd have a conference call with my editors, and I'd have a list of 10 or 11 or 12 issues that seemed to be on the minds of my sources. And my sources were, soldiers in Eastern Congo and fisher people in Angola and, medical doctors in Kenya, what have you. And what was nice about that is that it was kind of not imposing from above, kind of from this kind of anthropological gaze on kind of what to write about Africa, but asking Africans themselves what was on their minds, and then trying to craft stories around those ideas, and only do a few of them. So, like the mission from headquarters in Chicago was pick 6 or 7 of these best ideas that you think will be kind of the most important for Africans this year, and spend a month or 2 on each one. Right. So already both enterprise and immersive reporting combined. It didn't mean that if there was like a coup somewhere or if there's a major election or something that I didn't kind of stop what I was doing and get on a plane and cover it. I did. I did a lot of war reporting. At the time, Africa was embroiled in a lot of different conflicts. But the main kind of mind wave was with these long form immersive projects. And so after doing that for years, I felt like I have the best job in the journalism world. It's like, not, and also at that time I was being asked to go cover Central Asia and the Middle East as international conflicts blew up there, right? The infamous GWAT, global war on terror. I got to that, and so I covered Iraq and wars in the former Yugoslavia. After doing all of that, I thought, I'm very happy. I could easily continue doing this and still be very happy. It's an amazing, privileged, humbling life to be able to do this, to go out and see, witness, history being made, and then share it with readers around the world. But I thought I was missing still, that there was something missing, and I wanted to go even more deeply into stories. And the next stage would have been kind of books. Normally, that's what people like in my position do. They kind of graduated. But I wasn't really ready to write books. I didn't feel prepared. So I did something kind of halfway, which was, let's do a long assignment, a global assignment that goes across the world, but does it very slowly, and that's connected. So the methodology went from kind of immersive story here 2 or 3 months, immersive story over here a month, immersive story over here 2 months, one big immersive story for 7 months underneath all of it, to immersive story after immersive story after immersive story, but attached to each other as on a string. The metaphor that I probably overuse is like beads on a string that connect to each other at some subterranean level through a journey. So like I might write a couple weeks ago a story about archaeology, and then this week turn in a story about frog ecology. In this case, in both cases, in South Korea, that they're connected by a journey, so that they're not like just, fractals in a or pieces of tesserae in a mosaic. They're actually connected through a physical journey, and that gives this project a certain kind of narrative oomph, a certain velocity and direction that I didn't have when I was chunking stories hopping around. So that's how this came about. And I must say I'm making it, as we always do in retrospect, kind of clean and simple and kind of all connected. It was chaos. It was a mess. So I was kind of like figuring out, what am I to do next? I remember I was working on a cattle ranch in West Texas. I had quit the Chicago Tribune. And that's when this kind of, in a desert horizon, that's when these kind of long wave ideas started about connecting storytelling, immersive storytelling sequentially in a journey, but not just any random journey, but attaching it to the primordial journey humans across.
It's interesting. I mean, you had your Texas ranch, Arati has a forest. I think I need to find a boat and go out into the middle of the ocean or something and sort of replicate the experience. But Paul, uh, along with your journey, you've also been teaching slow journalism. We did workshops, for instance, in India. You've been doing workshops with schools right around the world along the walking trail. It, it's something that I struggle to wrap my head around. Can this form of journalism be taught? And the reason why I'm half skeptical is because from experience, I realized the one thing you need more than anything else is a tremendous amount of patience. You've got to get out of the habit of expecting every trip or every day to produce results in the form of this is a story that I can write tonight or whatever. We often go days, weeks. We just came back from a road trip of about 14 days with very little in actual storytelling, lots of insight, but very little to show for it in terms of actual storytelling. So, question is, can this be taught? Can people imbibe this, and how would you go about teaching it?
And hopefully we'll all together be teaching more together. Talking about school. Yes and no. I mean, it's, as you know, it's a complicated question, complicated answer, but no, I don't think you really, it's like teaching writing. I mean, you can show people the tools to kind of construct basic sentences and paragraphs that make sense, but you can't really teach them how to see the world, right? In a way that's original and unique. But so that's the discouraging part, the honest but discouraging part. And I actually mentioned the honest and discouraging part at the beginning of every workshop, just to adjust expectations. But then, on the other hand, what the workshops do is they provide a space that allows people to try. What we're doing with our workshops, I think, partly is just getting people to step out of their daily life where they're expecting to do a story every day, night, week, whatever, and give themselves the opportunity and the grace, if you will, to make an attempt at thinking long thoughts and make an attempt at being patient. Because if we don't, many people, myself included, may not have the discipline to do that on your own. So I think, these kind of lectures and workshops are kind of like the walk itself. When walking partners join me and I learn from them and they, teach me, tell them about the project, is people go away with from these walking intervals with very different experiences and different learnings, but it does change them. At some level, people who walk away from our workshops think a little bit differently. Whether they can apply these new ideas, which are actually really ancient ideas, is another matter. To be really frank, that's not my responsibility. It's theirs. But at least we can say, here's Arati, here's Premji, here I am. We're going to sit in a room with you and think long thoughts and encourage you to think long thoughts. And that is the workshop. I mean, that's it. We go through all these slide lectures. We talk about methodologies. We do critiques. We go, out with them in a taxi to watch them interview. All that is kind of, it's necessary and it's good. And of course it's important, but it's mainly saying take a week of your life just to get off the merry-go-round, to kind of look at where you are in your work and where you are in the world, to see if you can make it better and deeper by taking a deep breath. I mean, it's just like giving people an opportunity, right, to do that. I think that's what the workshops are.
Well, what I'm hearing from you, where you talk about take a deep breath to see where your place is in the world, it's essentially about reconnecting, connecting with the earth, with the land, with people around you, with whatever is around you, right? Environment. Of course, environment has become such a loaded word now to mean something else, but really it is what's the world around us. And slow journalism, if I'm hearing what you're saying, is to get back, to reclaim, that position of being one, interconnected creature that is the universe, and then feeling those connections and feeling that elemental draw of everything around you. When you Now it's been what? You started walking in 2013, we're at 2025, so that's an amazing 12 years, which is just what a feat. Salute. But
Yeah.
what have you seen, or all across the world? How do people perceive environment? What do people perceive their place in the world to be? And I know it's not going to be one monolith, it's going to be different answers. But if we were to look around urban India, for example, there is a disconnect. There is a huge disconnect from people won't probably be able to answer where their water comes from if they open the tap. They're probably going to say tap, but then they won't know where that water is, connected to, and so on. But so what through the world is this a malaise that is common across the world, or is it something that you've seen that's quite varied and that people have different takes on what environment means to them?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question, and I wish I had a really good answer for it, but it's complicated, and I can say, I have to be careful not to blame everything on urbanization, but basically, a factoid that always comes to my mind that stuck with me for years now is that according to the United Nations in 2010, humankind passed this Rubicon for the first time in its 300,000 year long history, which is more people started living in cities than in the countryside, however you want to define the countryside. That was for me, kind of a really epic milestone in the collective consciousness of our species that got very little attention because people think of it as, oh, it's urbanization. Well, no, I mean, of course it is, but it's also about how you look at yourself within not just landscape, but the stream of time. And so it's natural, and we've been going into cities, for 12,000 years since we started building them up, at least villages and towns, right, that long ago, the origins of agriculture. So it's kind of now we've internalized a lot of this, that it seems normal, but the disconnect is real. And there's always been this kind of tension between people who live in cities, people who don't, through history, right? Nomadic cultures sweeping through settled cultures. If you walk through the Sahel, I've walked parts of it. That dynamic is so vivid and so existential. I mean, it's life and death. It causes violence. It's ancient. Abel and Cain, back and using that old Bible story, it's very, very deep and very old. Is Abel or Cain, are they either one of them kind of masters of their cosmos or in better form? Well, that's debatable. I mean, people who live in cities are probably the best educated in the world, and access to more resources to learn about the world and the environment than many people. But the physical disconnect, leaving the intellect apart, I think it comes at a cost because we are still physical creatures. And I often describe my reportage as somatic reporting. I'm using my body to tell a story. I'm feeling the story through my body, all five senses moving slowly at 5 kilometers an hour, sweating through a story, shaking with cold through a story. And so what moving indoors has done, it has been a physical kind of filter that's come down in front of our consciousness that makes it really, really, really easy to forget that we're still part of nature. And when I tell, I'll be maybe even giving a class in Tokyo about environmental reporting coming up, is nature always wins. Nature always wins. It wins in our individual lives when our bones kind of settle into the dust. It wins when our cities run out of water. It wins when empires crumble to dust. When pasture lands dry up or rivers dry up. there are many examples of this in India itself, right? So it's a tough thing to kind of, as we all three would agree, and you especially are really a master at conveying this notion of slow violence perpetrated against nature is really hard to get people to kind of put their arms around when they're in the middle of it, when they're, number one, benefiting from it, and number two, not seeing it in front of their eyes. And number three, very distracted by the million things that is required of us who live in cities to be just a million distractions in order to have the standard of living that we have. There's more clarity if you move with concentric rings outside of cities to get, the suburbs, maybe the abattoirs where the animals are processed. Those people talk to those people who do that work about nature. Go a little bit further to the people who plant the crops that feed us. Ultimately, into the deserts of, far western India, where people are moving animals around the way we. There's the blade of understanding gets sharper and sharper and sharper because your survival depends on it. And so there's no abstraction about being connected to nature when you're living off of the water hole.
Right.
It's hard. It's a challenge. We all have our tricks to try to animate that crisis and make it resonate in people's hearts who live behind glass and concrete. It's hard to do.
Yeah.
And it's universal. To get back to your original question, it's everywhere.
Mm.
Yeah. Paul, you did mention in passing that you saw the same phenomenon in India as well. You walked India from all the way from the Punjab to Manipur. To just build on Arti's question about the environment, what was broadly your takeaway about how we are dealing with our environment as a country, as a people? I know I'm asking you to generalize, and that's not something that you're very comfortable with, but yeah.
Yeah. I think, one seeming advantage that a place like India may have over, say, Japan, where there's hyper urbanization, is that people still actually live in the countryside. Right? I've been walking through Japan for several months, and it's astonishing to me. I'm still dizzy at how empty the countryside is. It is. I describe it as kind of a raptured landscape. It's like the people have been left their clothes behind and ascended into the clouds. There's just nobody in these villages. The fields are going to weed, and the fisher people's nets are rotting under the sun, and it's astonishing to me. I think Japan, in that case, might have more serious difficulties in kind of reanimating the connection with nature than India, because in India, many, 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 many people still live in the rural economy. So India has this advantage of a relatively large segment of the population who still are soil, and therefore can educate the rest of us who are not about the stakes involved in neglecting or abusing things like the soil and the water and what happens. However, that's the good news. The bad news is that a lot of these folks are at the mercy of a very predatory economy that devalues traditional systems of knowledge and imposes economies of scale based on huge inputs. And I'm thinking of agriculture in particular. The number of conversations that I've had with Indian farmers about, our grandparents did it this way, but they don't even grow the same crops anymore because you can't live off it. There's no market for it. We've gone over to kind of cash crops that kind of bring in a better profit margin to feed our families, to send our kids to school, to pay, school fees or what have you. but it's highly unnatural. So what used to be kind of a system of knowledge that was adapted to the environment and great in this sort of this very fine-tuned balance, and yes, precarious, because it did not have the advantage of like pumping groundwater. If a drought came, you found ways to deal with it, right, in a sustainable way. That has been largely, in my experience, subsumed by industrial practices. The Green Revolution, both kept so many people alive to have amazing lives, and I'm a beneficiary of the Green. I think I can safely say that all of us are, but we're only now belatedly coming awake to the consequences, in terms of which both of you know, such tremendous abuse of the water resource of India, the biggest water in the world. Last time I was looking into it, which is probably even worse now, was 600 million people, right, in India affected by water quality and the lack of availability, to the destruction of biodiversity, because animals get in the way, wildlife gets in the way when you're driving combines around. That said, there are shining exceptions. Again, they're small. They're maybe, even if you want to call them boutique, but there are people trying to push against this and come up with new ideas. And both of you have covered this. So some of the most heartening experiments in combining the best of modern technology with traditional systems of knowledge I saw in India. And so right now they're struggling to get their voices heard over the industrial economy of the Green Revolution. But I think eventually I'm hopeful that they will be heard as the high cost economically in money of maintaining this industrial system becomes unsustainable. Sadly, it may have to be that, an economic factor that changes the way we think rather than a biological environmental factor. And hopefully it won't be too late, right, by then. After everything is ashes, then we wake up and say, well, we're not making a profit anymore, so maybe let's go back to see what crap is. Boy, that's a terrible way to kind of adapt to change as a species, but that's sort of our species. We don't really think ahead too much.
What you're saying, Paul, P. Sainath had a very interesting article it was republished in PARI just, I think, maybe a few days ago. And, his words were, here is the agrarian crisis in 5 words: corporate hijack of Indian agriculture, which is kind of what you were alluding to as well.
Mm-hmm.
And then he proceeds to quote a Professor Cain, who is an economist, the process by which that is achieved, to quote Professor Nagaraj in 5 words: predatory commercialization of the countryside. So it's pretty much what you were saying, really. And I would, we'll put this in the show notes. I will link to this article in the show notes, because that's it's a wonderful summation, really, of where we are with our countryside and what we sadly might have to look forward to, really.
No,
I mean,
absolutely.
it's been fabulous. Just hearing from you, Paul. When are you coming back to India? Serious question.
Yeah. I really should try while I'm in this hemisphere, because as you both know, I'll be taking a cargo ship into the new world. Yeah, the honest answer is I don't know. I had plans to come visit you both coming back. And I could try stopping over on my way back to Japan. It'd be great to see you both. It's our visit a long overdue, and I'll put our heads together about.
Yeah, and we have a lot of work to do together going forward. So it'll be great to meet up. But
Yeah.
Thank you regardless. It's been, I mean, we could, as we do, and we have in the past, talk for hours and exchange and swap stories for hours and giggle like idiots. We do that. But
Well,
I'm
Uh,
mindful of your time too, Paul, and thank you
Oh,
so
great.
much for coming on
Yeah,
our inaugural show.
yeah, no, it's
yeah,
fantastic. It's
that
wonderful.
said, the giggling is the two of you, and I'm the butt of it most of the time, but always a pleasure.
No,
So, yeah,
I'm kind of neutral. Prem. I try to
yeah,
be.
I know, I know, I know,
Yeah,
I know.
Yeah.
he's the peacemaker.
Atiji does all the hard work on that front.
Yeah. So, yeah, like Aarti said, thank you so much, Paul. I know you've got about 50 calls lined up and all the rest of the work that you're doing, but totally a pleasure. And
No, it's a pleasure.
seriously hoping that you make it to India, to Bangalore soonest.
Yeah,
Uh,
let's put our heads together on that. And
mhm.
yeah, and congratulations on this new wonderful forum. I can see it being really, really great, and we'll be delighted to continue to share it around. So keep me in the loop. Yeah,
We'll
Absolutely.
definitely do. We'll definitely do, and safe travels to you. And we'll of
thank,
course be in touch.
thank you.
Yeah.
All
Take
right, my friends.
care. Bye.
Thank you, Paul.
Cheers.
Bye bye. Uh,
So in every episode, I think what we are going to do is talk about books that we have been either reading in in these past few weeks, or recommendations of books that we absolutely love. And so for this episode, I'm going to ask Prem to go first with his recommendation and what he's reading this right now.
Yeah, good job putting me on the spot. With a lot, with a lot of the travel that I've been doing, reading has been a bit erratic. But there is this book that I've been dipping into off and on. It's called The Madhouse Effect. It's written by Michael Mann and Tom Toles. Michael Mann is a climatologist. He's a geophysicist. He's got a solid body of work that has contributed to the collective understanding of climate change. Tom Toles won a Pulitzer in 1990 for editorial cartoons. And why I like this book is one of the things that I find very difficult to do is explain climate change to a newbie in a way that is accessible, easy to assimilate, easy to understand both the macro and the micro level. At the macro level, what's happening, at the micro level, why you should be bothered about it, how it affects you. What this book does, and it does it in very sparse 150 odd pages. Uh, it's got the basics of the science. It uh, digs deep into the shifting tactics of the climate deniers. The first was denying climate, and then when the science became overwhelming, it is now distracting from climate change. And interestingly, it also offers some really good practical solutions for how each person can somehow contribute to lessening climate change in small and medium sized ways. And the best thing is, it avoids jargon, it uses humor, and so it's a nice entry level book into climate change. And I'm reading that after reading more serious books on climate change because I want to be able to explain this, and this is giving me a lot of ammo, if you will. Okay, your turn.
Okay, so the one that I want to bring up to our listeners today is actually let me see if I can show you this. You see this?
Uh-huh.
Okay, there we go.
Yeah.
It's a Dr. Seuss book. It's, of course, it's supposedly a children's book, but very much, very much an adult's book, written in 1971, 54 years ago, and it's more relevant almost today. I think I won't say more because this is a book that you can probably read in 15 minutes. But I strongly recommend, if you haven't read the Lorax, to read it. And I won't give the plot away, but I will leave you with one word: unless. And that's the word that the book revolves around. And when you read it, you'll realize that that one word is really everything: unless. And you'll know why if you read the book. So, The Lorax by Dr. Seuss. And it's available almost everywhere.
Have you thought of a career in marketing? Because I suddenly realized that as soon as this recording is over, I'm going to go pick it up. Somehow I haven't come across that book so far. But that seems to be a
Speaking of a
good note.
career in marketing, I came from a career in marketing. I'm not going back.
Okay, so that explains two things. Both how you sort of sold me the book and also why you are where you are right now. And that seems to be a good note to sort of end this one on, this particular episode. As usual, people, if you like what you've been hearing, please click subscribe so that you are in touch with future episodes. Hit the bell icon. You'll get a notification when we drop the next episode. This one airs on the 17th of March. And from then on, every fortnight, a new episode drops on the second Mondays. So there's that. Arati, anything to add? Oh yeah,
Just that.
keep in touch.
Yes, and that we will be reading all the comments on this, on, down below here, as well as all your emails. Please write into us. Brickbats and bouquets welcome. Marginlands@gmail.com. That shall also be put in the show notes. We will be doing a fairly extensive show notes with links to a lot of things that we both have mentioned, as well as what Paul might have mentioned, and the news that we read out as well. All of that is going to be in the show notes, so it's going to be rich. And here's really hoping From the Marginlands has been a good listen for you guys, and hope to see you again and again. Take care.
Right, and safe travels, Arati. Look forward to your
Thank you.
stories from the Sunderbans.
Thank you. Stay safe all.